This video is for AQA A-Level Economics Paper 3, and we're going to be looking at one specific question in this paper, which is the 10-mark question. Now, this is the only 10-mark question you'll get in the exam series of Paper 1, Paper 2 and Paper 3. And it's very different to the questions which are similar in mark allocation. So for example, in Paper 1 and 2 you get a 9-marker, which is just explain. In Paper 1, 2 and 3 you get an explain of 15 marks, but then all of a sudden in Paper 3 you get this 10 marker and it's asking you to what extent, which is obviously an evaluative command phrase. So this video will look at how to answer this question but via the year of 2017. So 2017 Paper 3 was all about the manufacturing industry, and what you'll find is that you'll have lots and lots of data, lots of extracts of quantitative and qualitative data. And because you've got so much information, my first piece of advice would be don't read the case study first, read the question. As soon as you finish the multiple choice section and you get onto this section, read the 10 marker and then go back to the case study. And to be honest, you really only need to consider the extracts which are mentioned in the question, which direct you to the question. You might want to quickly skim through the rest of it just in case, but the information that they direct you to, which will be the quantitative data, is absolutely crucial in answering this question. And the reason being is because this question is examining or testing your ability to not only interpret data, but manipulate data and use data to support final judgments. So, in this scenario, and every single Paper 3 has a different scenario, you are going to be working, or you're employed by a firm of economic consultants working for the government, and you are asked to produce a report on the importance of manufacturing for the UK economy. Now, you won't actually write a report, but by answering the 3 questions, those answers will help provide the information that's needed. So, to begin with, I've already mentioned, but it says to what extent. So you will require evaluation. And actually the mark scheme mentions an overall judgment. So it's absolutely crucial that if you want to get into the top level band, you have to have an overall judgment at the end of your answer. Also, application is absolutely crucial. So as it says here, you must use the data in extract B. It's absolutely crucial that you quote the figures and you manipulate the data. So I'll talk a little bit more about the manipulation of data in a second, but the data has to be accurately used. So that means if you're doing it in percentages, you have to include the percentage sign. If it's index numbers, again, you have to mention the indice. If it's, for example, in millions, you have to mention it's in millions. You have to quote the data as accurately as you can. Now, some of the data is quite hard to read, and the examiner will, I suppose, allow a certain range as long as it's realistic. If that range is not realistic, then they'll consider it to be inaccurate. Now, this is the mark scheme for this 10 marker that we're going to be looking at. And what I like about the mark schemes for these 10 markers in Paper 3 is they are much more descriptive than your usual marking grids for other questions in AQA economics. So it really tells you how to structure this 10 mark answer. So to begin with, include at least 3 relevant, well-developed issues. So in other words, you will need 3 paragraphs of analysis. Also, it tells you that you have to use numerical and statistical data. It asks for a final judgment. So in other words, 3 paragraphs of analysis and 1 paragraph of a final judgment. And finally, and again, this is crucial, especially if you want to get that 8, that 9, that 10 marks, you have to show some appreciation of the limitation of the data. So what I mean by that is whatever data that has been presented to you, is there anything that you can criticise? Is there any issues with that data? Have they, for example, missed something out? Is there something that you would request, that you would want more data? Is it to do with consistency? So for example, is it all in real terms, or is there one bit of data in nominal, one in real? Is it giving you, in terms of much data, for that sector as possible, and I'll delve into that more with the UK manufacturing industry in a minute. But if you compare level 3 to level 2, you'll be able to notice the differences. So for example, in level 2 it's only asking for 2, but in level 3 it's asking for 3 well-developed issues. So what we'll do in a second, we'll have a look at the case study, and then I will go through a model answer just to show you how you can pretty much achieve those descriptors and achieve those marks. So some final advice. Aim for 3 relevant developed issues and a final paragraph for a conclusion. So in other words, 4 paragraphs. Make sure you quote the data accurately. You must include a supported final judgment, which will be your 4th paragraph, and you must discuss limitations of the data. Now, again, that doesn't have to be in the final judgment. It can be, or maybe you've included it in some of your earlier paragraphs, but you have to discuss limitations. So, to begin with, I was actually reading Extract A, which is not Extract B, of course, which it does direct you to, but I did notice this sentence, which I thought was absolutely crucial. Actually, the beginning of this sentence, where it says the UK manufacturing sector is diverse. Now, as soon as I read that, I thought to myself, well, I hope the data that they provide then is diverse. If the manufacturing sector is so diverse, then surely they are providing the data to break that manufacturing sector down so we get a full, holistic understanding of the manufacturing sector. If not, then straight away I might be thinking to myself, could this be a limitation? So then I do arrive at Extract B, and I get this figure 1 to begin with, which is index. So in quarter 1 2003, it's roughly about 98. Again, that was in the range, so that was allowed. In 2015, it's 96.5 roughly. And I want to have an overall understanding from 2003 to 2015, because that's what the question was asking for in terms of how the manufacturing sector, if it has declined or not. So what I've noticed is an overall decline of 1.5%. However, I have noticed that since 2009 quarter 1, there has been some growth. So I am going to consider that as well. But then I move on to figure 2. Figure 2 is employment, and it will be in millions. And 2003 quarter 1, it will be about 3.65 million. And in quarter 1 2015, it's about 2.99 million. So I calculated that there's an overall decline of 18.1% just by simply doing a percentage change like I did with figure 1. Again, I've also noticed in 2009, it's roughly about 2.79, and it has grown since then, which does relate to figure 1 because, again, that trend of positive growth from 2009 is seen in both figures. I go to figure 3, and what I notice is that in terms of the years, exports, imports have both actually risen. So, for example, exports have risen by 51.5%, which is an overall increase of £97.1 billion. But imports have risen by more. It's risen by 71.2%, which is an overall of £171.2 billion. I've also looked at the overall balance, and the balance has deteriorated. There has been an overall decline, and that's of 74.1 billion. So again, I'm thinking, well, why is this relevant? Well, if imports have grown at a much faster rate than exports, then it might suggest that we are more reliant on manufactured goods from abroad. And because we cannot manufacture it maybe in this country, we have to get it from abroad. So that's my initial thoughts as I'm planning this answer. And then finally, I've got figure 4. Now, figure 4, I'm not a massive fan of this data, if I'm being honest. I don't really like how the years have been set out. So again, for example, 1949 to 1973, and then all of a sudden you've got 2008 and 2009. So it's looking at 1 year then, and then it's looking at a pretty big range in previous rows. So, but I have noticed again that the average rate of growth of UK manufacturing is less almost throughout the whole period after 1973. And in 2010 to 15, it's 1.1%, whilst the average rate of UK real GDP is 2%. So again, it's risen since 2008 and 9, but it's been a much larger rise in the average rate of growth. So again, it might suggest that manufacturing has not been a massive contributor for that. Now, I also just want to mention that I did notice that this figure 4 is in real terms. If I go back to this is in current prices, so in nominal terms. So I might just want to consider that. Why have they not gone for a consistent approach? So this was my answer. So this is my first paragraph. So paragraph 1, considering the data in figure 1, there's been an overall decline in manufacturing output in the UK from quarter 1 2003 to quarter 1 2005 of 1.5%. So what I've done there is I've considered the years and I've manipulated the data to get that 1.5%. So in figure 2, there has also been an overall decline in the same time period for manufacturing employment of 18.1%. And this may indicate a lack of derived demand for labour. Unemployment is likely to fall at a greater rate than output, as labour costs are a significant cost for firms and they're likely to have capital goods. So that's my suggestion, that actually maybe the manufacturing output has fallen because, well, not only has manufacturing output fallen, but the labour needed has also fallen, but at a much greater rate. However, I have started to evaluate that point by considering a limitation. So I've put, it is also worth pointing out that with the financial crisis, which was a demand-side shock for the economy, it resulted in a significant fall. But since the final quarter of 2009, there has been some growth in both manufactured output and employment. So I move on to my second paragraph. And what I've done is I've just signposted it to the examiner. So this is secondly. Secondly, in figure 3, there's been an overall decline in the trade balance of goods of £74.1 billion. Making sure I've got the pound sign, making sure I've got it in billions, and that's from 2003 to 2015. So imports have risen at a much faster rate than exports, which may indicate a dependency on manufactured goods from abroad. So even though exports have risen by 51.5%, imports have grown by 71.2%, meaning that there is a rise in demand for goods, but domestic manufacturing isn't sufficient to meet this demand and imports are required. So that's my second paragraph. My third paragraph, which is my final analytical paragraph, is this one. So finally, figure 4 shows both the average rate of growth of UK manufacturing and the average rate of growth of UK real GDP. Since 2009, there has been growth. UK manufacturing has grown by 1.1% between 2010 and 15, and UK real GDP has grown by 2% in the same time period. So therefore, GDP has grown at a greater rate. However, 2010 to 2015 is the second highest growth rate since 1949. Yet from 2003, there has been 2 periods of negative growth in manufacturing, but this was also seen with real GDP. In fact, there has never been a period of time when growth in manufacturing has exceeded growth in real GDP. Nevertheless, the time periods provided are inconsistent. So what, again, I'm starting to do is I'm starting to think about limitations of the data, and I'm starting to criticise maybe the data that's been provided. So for example, it ranges from 24 years between 1949 and 1973 to 1 year in 2008 and 2009. And therefore it would have been constructive to have a consistent time period to recognise the changes in growth of both real GDP and manufacturing. So that's one of my limitations. Now remember, there's the conclusion test. The examiner will straight away have a look to see if there is an overall judgment, because that'll help them to decide if it's level 3 or level 2 or maybe even level 1. So, in judgment to the question, again, I've signposted, I've told the examiner that this is my overall conclusion. And I believe that the data suggests that there has been a decline in manufacturing. So I've clearly answered the question. Figures 1 and 2 clearly highlight the overall fall since 2003. Figure 3 also highlights the need to import manufactured goods, whilst Figure 4 shows that growth in manufacturing has not recovered since before the financial crisis in 2008. On the other hand, there is some limitations in the data. So I've actually used the words from the mark scheme as well, and I'm telling the examiner that I'm pretty much trying to tick all the boxes in terms of what the examiner's after. So there's too much inconsistency. I've already mentioned one inconsistency in my last paragraph, but I'm also going to mention another one here. Figure 4 is in real terms, whilst Figure 3 is in nominal terms, so that lacks consistency. Also, as stated in Extract A, manufacturing is very diverse and the data provided is very vague. It's not considering the different industries in manufacturing, such as the automotive industry, which may provide a different insight into which specific industries are declining.